just that few words, just flipping those few words a little bit can have such a different impact on someone, can it? That's great.
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing I love about marketing, right? Time and again, and I've been fortunate, I've worked in a number of these campaigns that I think if you can, and part of it is having worked on the agency side and really understanding creativity and how powerful it can be. But getting to that human insight and allow, I talk about it as you kind of cross that human insight with the brand truth. You bring those together, and that's when you, and like you said, you have to have the right to own that insight, right? Like, right. Yeah, anyone can say, well, and I'm going to talk about like girl, sure. But if you don't have a reason, a foundation for why that makes sense for you as a brand, consumers are going to reject it. So I think really thinking it through, it's deeper work than it seems, but when you land on it, it's pretty magical.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Look, let's face it. Our industry can have a bad reputation, and I can see why, right? Just scroll through YouTube or social media and you'll see self-appointed gurus shouting about tricks and hacks and shortcuts. But sustainably successful marketing is not about shortcuts. It's about digging into the very essence of what it means to be a human being. Sounds pompous, I know, but hear me out. Marketing is about reflecting the core realities, behaviors, and emotions that drive human decision-making and actions. The essence of effective marketing lies in its ability to connect with people on an authentic level, speaking to their experiences, desires, and needs. So when I read this lesson in a podcast guest application, marketing is often about showcasing human truths. I knew I had found a kindred spirit, and I wanted to sit down and learn. Here to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Karuna Rawal, CMO and CRO of Nature's Fynd. Thanks for joining us, Karuna.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Daniel.
All right, let's take a quick look at your background so people who know who I'm talking to. So I just cherry-picked from your long and illustrious career, but I saw that you are a marketing director for North American Drug Retail at Procter & Gamble. You are the U.S. President and Global Chief Strategy Officer at ARC Worldwide, part of Publicis Group, and President and Group Client Lead at Publicis Group. Karuna, for the past 5 years, Karuna has been at Nature's Fynd, where she is now Chief Revenue Officer and Chief Marketing Officer. Nature's Fynd has raised $500 million in funding since its founding in 2012. Backers include celebrity investors like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Al Gore, and Jack Ma, along with institutional investors like SoftBank and Blackstone. Karuna leads a team of 17 across marketing, sales, PR, innovation, culinary, business development, and creative, plus 3 agencies. She says startups run fast and lean. All right, so tell us about running fast and lean. What is your day like as CRO and CMO at this startup?
Well, I have to say no 2 days are the same. So it's hard to describe a typical day because we can go anywhere from working on some packaging innovation that we're working on to looking and tasting new products that are in our innovation pipeline, to meeting with our creative team who's working on the next, campaign for our new launches, to getting into a business discussion, talking about our pricing strategy. You name it, it's all bundled up in one day, and no 2 days are the same. So it's a lot of fun, a lot of very quick decision making, which is very different from being in the corporate world. So, things that used to take months and months and many meetings and many PowerPoint decks often happen in a quick hallway conversation or, grabbing a few people around the table and making those calls. So, yeah, it's all of the above.
And you mentioned hallway conversation. I think you're joining me from home today. Like, What is that? Where is it? Hybrid? How are you figuring that all out?
Yeah, we are a hybrid. So we actually built our new facility and moved in on February 16th, 2020. Think back to that time. So we've been there about 2 weeks and kind of all had to go home. We slowly, we kind of kept the essential functions. Obviously everybody shut down for, I think it was a couple of months, and then slowly our manufacturing and the essential functions went back. And then over time, I think the functions like marketing, finance, others who don't have to be in the office every day, we have sort of a hybrid arrangement. And part of that is because, we've grown so much since we built the facility that it literally, if all of us showed up at the same time, we wouldn't all fit. So it is a hybrid. So it depends on sort of needs of the business and if there's, critical meetings and reason to be in the office. And again, we're in the food business. So I tend to be in the office quite a bit for tasting different things we're working on with our culinary team. That
sounds fun, though.
Yeah,
Having tasting sounds fun. That's a reason to be in the office.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's take a look at some of the lessons from the things you made in your career. As I like to mention, I've never done anything else. I've never been like an actuary or a podiatrist, but like as marketers, we get to make things, and that makes us fun. I guess in the culinary world, they do too, and then you actually get to eat it. But so the first lesson you mentioned, I said this at the top, I love this. Marketing is often about showcasing human truths. This is what makes marketing fun to me. Yes, it's a business acumen, but it's about people and learning about these odd things we call human beings and how to serve them. So how did you learn this lesson?
So, if I go way back to when I decided I really loved marketing, at the heart of it was this notion of really understanding what makes people tick, right? I'd always been curious, and I'm an immigrant. I came to this country at the age of 9, and one of the things you learn as you get accustomed to different cultures, because as a child of a diplomat, we lived in many different countries. And so it was always, kind of figuring out what's going on, what are the cues, how do you understand why people do what they do, and how do you acclimate? And so it kind of, when I learned about marketing, it was kind of a ready, logical transition to say, wow, this is all about understanding what makes people tick. So really getting to the heart of, an insight, a human insight, to me is what does really builds great marketing ideas and marketing campaigns. So an example of this is, when I was working on always at the agency at Leo Burnett and ARC, and we were really tasked with really understanding how do we build this business and how do we make this brand more relevant to younger consumers. So, millennials and Gen Z. It was kind of known as, it is the number one brand. It had functional superiority, but it didn't really have an emotional connection with its consumers. So really digging into, looking at the data and trying to understand an insight around, what is it that drives people to change behavior? And with this particular brand, as with many I've worked on, really getting to that initial point where people make a decision whether they're going to enter, when they're entering the category, when they're trying to decide. And obviously with this category, it's at puberty, and when girls are trying to figure themselves out and they're going through this change and they have to make a decision to enter the category. So it was really around really understanding what makes, the consumer figure out how do they think about what's going on in their lives, and getting much deeper than just the brand. Because, as much as we all revolve our lives around marketing, most people walking around do not. They're not thinking about brands. They're thinking about their own lives. And that's what kind of led us to this interesting data we found around the brand, that girls lose 50% of their confidence, when they hit puberty, and it takes a very long time for it to come back. And it's, they lose confidence twice as much as boys. And so it was a very dramatic piece of data, but really unwrapping that and thinking about how do we bring that to life in a way that is really compelling, that can drive a change in behavior was really the exciting part of working on this campaign. And I was a strategist on this campaign, and it was really to help uncover this human truth that lay behind this idea of confidence was really what we were looking at. And what are all the things in society that actually hurt a girl's confidence at that very vulnerable age? And that's where this idea of language and things people say and kind of say without even thinking. So this idea of like a girl being used as an insult, well, you throw like a girl, or you run like a girl. And we really thought about, well, how do you take that insight and turn it around? Because why should it be a negative thing? And then the more we dug into it, what we saw was, well, girls before puberty don't feel like it's an insult. They think it's a great thing because they think girls are just as, powerful as boys. And then we noticed the shift, and to be able to kind of do the social experiment and really show that, if you're probably familiar with the campaign, we really brought it to life in a way creatively that juxtaposed this truth, this human truth around, what's happening at this age and how the things we say and the things we do really can affect a girl's confidence. And so the entire campaign was built around that idea.
Oh, absolutely familiar with that campaign. It was a beautiful campaign. It was hats off to you, because it was a beautiful campaign, because not only, obviously, campaign's meant to sell a product in one sense, but I think it was also changed the culture, changed the way people looked at certain phrases. So that what a win-win to have there. And also it aligned with what that brand was. So I guess
That's
hypothetically,
exactly right.
any brand could have said like a girl, right?
Yeah.
Target could have said that, I guess, or whoever.
Yeah.
But boy, did it, as to your point, it aligned exactly with who that brand was starting to serve.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you about, you mentioned the functional aspects too. So I want to ask you about, like, if you have any examples of actually digging into human truth to communicate the functional aspects of a product. Because as marketers, when we talk about, I think sometimes that branding element is that big shiny piece, and that's what the A teams are going to get on, and that's what all the leaders want to get involved in. But sometimes we have to communicate the functional merits of the product. And I'll give you a quick example. I interviewed Anessa Landis, the vice president of marketing at Octane, on how I made it in marketing. And one of her lessons was, to market effectively, you have to think beyond what your product does. You have to understand the role it plays in your customers' lives. And for her product, it was a financing product for, it was a commercial, like a B2B financing product for people that owned different dealerships that sold power equipment and stuff like this. Basically, it was a financing equipment. So she wanted to get and understand their lives, not just, okay, how do they use my product, but what are their lives like and what role does my product play in their lives? So then she could get to the functional usage of her product, right? So for you, Karuna, like, do you have any examples of, that was a beautiful branding example, but how you actually unpack and understand the human truth of the functional usage of our product and then communicate that?
Yeah, this is going to be a little bit of an interesting example, because it's actually for some work I did when I was at the agency for Walgreens, and it was around their flu shot campaign. So, if you think about flu shots, and they were trying, everybody's got the same flu shots, right? Like, you can go to Walgreens, you can go to CVS, you can go, anywhere. But the challenge is getting, and this was a few years back, obviously before COVID and all of that, but getting people to come in and get the flu shot was the big challenge, right? People, and then having them choose to go to Walgreens as opposed to going to their doctor's offices or whatever it might be. So one of the things we said was, okay, what is it that's really preventing people from being able to do this? And our target focus was moms, because moms often are, they're busy taking care of everybody else. And one of the things that really falls off their list is taking care of themselves. So, we spent quite a bit of time trying to understand, like, what is going on in her life that is getting in the way of her going and getting a flu shot, and what's the messaging that would really help overcome that barrier. We literally talked about it in those terms. So we really spent some time understanding her life and all the things that she was busy doing, especially if you think about fall and back to school, which is when you're supposed to go get a flu shot. You're busy doing all of the things of getting your kids ready for school and shopping and, getting your house ready, whatever, all the other things. And then she literally kept saying, well, taking care of myself and getting a flu shot just keeps getting lower and lower on my to-do list. So one of again, there is a human insight still, even though it's a very functional campaign. We got to the insight of, as soon as you say to mom, you need to go do this to take care of yourself, she's like, oh, I got all these other things to do. But the minute you turn around the message and you say, arm yourself for the ones you love, all of a sudden it was a flip on the insight to say, wait a minute, it's not about, I'm actually doing this for them too. So that little nuance of understanding her life and how the category fit into her life, or didn't in that case, allowed us to craft a campaign that actually ended up, they hit their goal of, their 6-month goal in 5 weeks. I mean, we drove more flu shots, it won a Reggie Award, and went on to be a campaign that they still run. So very proud of that work as well.
That's great. That's a great understanding of other humans. And I know a lot in marketing, we talk about all these different new and emerging medias and programmatic and getting these things right, which are all important things, and understanding people also gets us in the right way. But I think that's beautiful, because just that few words, just flipping those few words a little bit, can have such a different impact on someone, can it? That's great.
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing I love about marketing, right? Time and again, and I've been fortunate, I've worked on a number of these campaigns that, I think if you can, and part of it is having worked on the agency side and really understanding creativity and how powerful it can be. But getting to that human insight and allow, I talk about it as you kind of cross that human insight with the brand truth. You bring those together, and that's when and like you said, you have to have the right to own that insight, right? Like, right. Yeah, anyone can say, well, and I'm going to talk about like a girl, sure. But if you don't have a reason, a foundation for why that makes sense for you as a brand, consumers are going to reject it. So I think really thinking it through, it's deeper work than it seems, but when you land on it, it's pretty magical.
Yeah. So, and you talked about some work with some major brands, but something you mentioned when I asked you about your day to day, you said like, well, now in my life, I got to make some pretty quick decisions, right? So let's look at this next story. You say, where there's a will, there's a way. And this, I think, is about one of those quick decisions and hopping on an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one is really about my time at Nature's Fynd. So it was, again, I think it was post-COVID. So I don't know, are we post-COVID? But I guess 2020.
I am.
It's hard to say, right? But it was in 2021, but we were still under COVID restrictions, I guess is the reason I bring that up. And Bill Gates and his Breakthrough Energy Ventures is one of our major investors. And there was an opportunity we heard from their group that Bill was going to be on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, and they were going to showcase a couple of his investment companies, and we were going to be one of them, which was like, wow, this is amazing. This was literally Christmas Eve, I think December 23rd. And he was supposed to be on, doing this taping in January. And, we said, okay, we'd like to come out and have the product and do all the stuff he would normally do. And they said, no, this is COVID. No one's coming. Just send us product. He's going to eat it on air and we'll go from there. And I thought, oh my goodness, first of all, you're like, hope this goes well. But more importantly, I thought, when that 60 Minutes airs, which as it turned out, it was on February 14th. And this is now, January 1st or so. And when that episode aired, and we didn't know at that point what kind of reaction he was going to have. Was it going to be, he was going to love it, or he was going to be like, this isn't, he's a very direct guy. So you can't.
Are you talking about Bill Gates or Anderson Cooper?
Yes, Bill Gates. Yeah.
So he had never tried it before.
He had not tried because these were new products.
Wow.
So
okay.
So it was risky, right? We're sending him product. We're hoping, I'm not there. Our CEOs, no one's there. But on the other hand, to me, it was like, okay, we can look at this and yes, of course, there's some risk. But on the other hand, we know our products are great. This is a great opportunity. How can we maximize this, right? And keep in mind, this is before we had launched. So this was very early stages. We hadn't even gotten into retail. We were not available anywhere. We were just developing the product. So we were sending them kind of our first batch, and it was going to be on 60 Minutes, and Anderson Cooper we thought was going to try it. So I turned to my team and I said, we are going to get so many eyeballs Googling. Well, first of all, people searching, and then where are they going to go? They're going to go to our website, and there's going to be no way for them to buy this product. We've got to do something so we can capitalize on that momentum. And we had planned to, launch our like a direct bundle in April. And I said, no, we got to do this by February 14th. And everyone's looking at me and like, 6 weeks. I'm like, yep, 6 weeks. We got to have a saleable product bundle ready to go. So when we literally built that thing in 6 weeks, which was insane, had to finish, finalizing our product, our packaging, all of the stuff, get it ready. So literally when the episode aired, we were all watching, fingers crossed. He tasted it and they both were like, this is really great. And we said, flip it on. And we literally turned it on and we sold out within 24 hours.
Wow.
And it was an amazing moment. Again, not without risk, but sometimes you have to find a way to make things happen. And the team still talks about this example because there was no way we thought we were going to be able to pull that off. And we did. And we were at that point a really tiny team from a marketing standpoint. But the momentum it gave us as a brand, and we were able to walk into retailers and show this clip of having been on 60 Minutes and with Bill Gates and Anderson and talking about our products and our company. And it just made that, sell into retail really smooth. Plus we got, early feedback from all those people that bought the product. We got lots of great insights. We were able to follow up with every one of them and continue to fine tune the product. So it turned out to be a great way to do a soft launch, which was totally unplanned. But actually, one of the values of our company is always find a way. And so this example to me is marketing is like that, right? Sometimes these things come up that are not planned for. They're opportunities you have to jump on. I mean, we see this all the time. Lots of great campaigns and ideas that just they happen in culture or they happen because an opportunity presents itself. And you have to be ready. You have to be ready to take full advantage as best as you can. And it wasn't perfect. We made, there were some speed bumps, but we got there and we accomplished what we needed to.
Wow. Well, let me ask you, we talked about human truths. Did you learn anything from seeing that Anderson Cooper and CNN and 60 Minutes team up close? Because I'm always curious about this, what we can learn from other industries. Like, that's why when you talked about human truths, like, for example, I love looking at stand-up comedy, and I learn a lot from that group because they're doing kind of a similar thing we're doing. They're setting up a proposition. They see if they get a conversion and stuff like this. And when I interviewed Jeannie Asimos, the head of content and communications at way.com and How I Made It Marketing, one of her lessons was about tenacity. And she talked about working as a producer at Entertainment Tonight and seeing it behind the scenes and seeing, you talk about the tenacity your team went through, right? Sometimes we just see the entertainment on the front end or those news shows on the front end.
Absolutely.
You don't see that tenacity behind the scenes that makes it all happen, right? And when we see that, then maybe we're like, maybe we can do it too for our product. So out of curiosity, just kind of being part of that and seeing that up close. I know you didn't get to go there in person, but did you learn anything from kind of Anderson Cooper and that whole team?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you just said, right? This idea of the show must go on, right?
Yeah.
we make it work. And they were under some very challenging circumstances. They didn't have any of the typical crew that they have. And I'll tell you even a funnier story. So while I couldn't go, the team did call me and say, look, normally you would be here or someone from your team who could help answer questions, because Bill always asks lots of questions as he's getting ready for, doing what he's doing. Can you just hang on the phone with us? And I was literally on the phone, Daniel, for 8 hours. And they'd be like, Bill wants to know, blah, 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 blah. And I'd answer the question. And they would go back. And I was like, do you want me to talk to Bill directly? They're like, no, just stay on the phone. And I was like, do you want me to get on Zoom? No, you're good. And so that entire Saturday, my family was just laughing so hard because I was literally on the phone in case, Bill had a question. But the thing about that, what it showed me is how prepared they were for anything that came up. So it's sort of like prepare for everything. The show must go on, make it happen even under really, really challenging circumstances. And I think in a startup, that's kind of what we do every single day. We're constantly, the curveballs keep coming. And, one day you're at the top of that roller coaster and the next day you're like, we just got this, commitment and now we have to figure out how to make it happen. Right. And that's been our reality. Like even when we started selling in retail, we thought, okay, well, we'll go to Whole Foods and we'll, maybe they'll take us in a few stores and then we'll go to a region, because we were still building up our capacity. And lo and behold, we have our first meeting and they're like, great, we'd like you to go national. And I was, my jaw dropped and I was like, national as in like the whole country? They were like, yeah. And so, we had to do some quick work to figure out if we could do that. And the reality was we didn't think we could do it at the level that we wanted. So we went back to them, which is unheard of, and said, hey, we are so excited, but we don't want to let you down. And we'd rather be prepared and make sure we can fire on all cylinders. So can we, scale it back a little bit? They, first they were like, okay, you understand we never ask brands to go national right off the bat. And I said, I understand. And I really appreciate it, but I want to make sure we do this right. So, they were very open to us then kind of scaling back a little bit until we could get our capacity going and build. But it's about, figuring out how do you pivot when unexpected things happen. How do you still, keep your eye on the ball and continue to move forward? But always full of challenges.
Well, that's a great example of being a good partner, which I'm going to ask you about in just a bit. You got a great story for that. But first I want to ask, that's a great startup story of, okay, boom, you've got an opportunity to get on the map. But you also said marketing matters even for legacy brands. So take us to this legacy brand you were working with, and why did marketing matter?
So the legacy brand, I was fortunate. I started my career at P&G and got to work on a number of legacy brands. So Jif peanut butter was my first brand. Then I worked on Folgers coffee. But the brand I think I love to talk about quite a bit is the brand that was my first brand manager assignment, which was on Duncan Hines, which was the baking mix business. And Duncan Hines at that point was in a lot of trouble and kind of had forgotten the fundamentals. I'm still a big believer in the 4 Ps of marketing, as old fashioned as that sounds. I think if you don't get those basics right, along with, as you and I talked about earlier, the human consumer or human insight, the brand truth, those basics are really, really important. You can add all the other stuff on top, but if those pieces are not on a solid foundation, it makes it a lot harder. So, Duncan Hines is a very well-known brand. People had heard of it. It's been around forever. It's like Betty Crocker, Pillsbury, Duncan Hines. But we were faltering when it came to marketing. We were out skewed on shelf. So we had become so focused on delivering. I used to joke we had 26 PhDs working on a moister cake. And when I walked in, I said, well, is our cake moist? And they're like, oh yeah, it's like 98% moist. And I'm like, And do people care if it's 2% more moist, or should we maybe work on something else? But meanwhile, we were not in the flavor game, and food is all about flavor. We were not, really looking at all the different more fun things that we could do. So really getting a solid innovation program that brought the brand kind of to the forefront, kind of modernized it was the first part of it. But then it was an overhaul of everything. Was introducing, we did 40 new items in a couple of years. We revamped the pricing strategy. We did new packaging. We came out with a new campaign. It was all the fundamentals because, you cannot rest on the laurel of, everybody, we had huge awareness as a brand, but no one was buying. That awareness was not turning into trial and repeat. And so really diagnosing where the problem was and what we needed to do in order to bring the brand into the 21st century was really a lot of the work that needed to be done. But I've seen that time and time again. If you look at all these legacy brands, Tide to me is always a great example. We did some work on Tide as well. They're constantly reinventing. It's still about clean, but there's new messaging. They're more culturally relevant. So you have to keep, I think, even with legacy brands, keep polishing the edges and keep looking for that insight that's going to drive the brand forward to the next generation. And I think that's one of the lessons I learned really well at P&G is really look at when do people enter a category, how are they making their decisions, what matters at that moment, and then how do they move through different phases of their life, and what role does that brand or category play at each stage, and then that's what helps guide your marketing.
Well, let's talk about how you learn that about the customer, because when you mentioned 40 new items in 2 years, that to me seems like a lot, even for a Procter & Gamble brand. That's a lot.
It was insane.
Yeah. So I wonder, how did you make sure you were launching new products, new SKUs that would matter to the customer? So, for example, I mentioned Onesa Landis earlier. I'd interviewed her on How I Made It Marketing. Another one of her lessons that I loved, she said, it's not about you. And when you make it about you, you're never going to succeed. And she talked about her time at General Mills working on the Muir Glen brand. And she saw that customers were concerned about BPA. So she had this great idea to take the tomatoes and put them in jars, glass jars, sell them at Whole Foods, and there's no BPA. And she was so focused on that, she overlooked the fact that the pricing, you mentioned the peas, the pricing for this would make it so expensive that people might want it, but it would be too expensive. They would never buy it. So there's so much that goes into launching 40 new items, getting the pricing right, the packaging, all that stuff. Can you give us just a little insight into how did you learn about the customer, that human truths, to give you a sense that, okay, 100% of these aren't going to be successful, but let's get a good batting average here?
Absolutely. So it was two-tiered, actually. The first was really working with our retailers to really understand, what do you think about Duncan Hines? What's going on? What's missing? What do we got right? What's not working? And, when you're a P&G, you have the ability to access customers to get that kind of insight. But often people don't ask them those questions, and they actually have a lot of insight as to what's working well with their shoppers and what's not. So that was kind of the first step. The second was really what you alluded to earlier, which was spending we did some really deep consumer research across the country in different demographics to really understand what did the brand mean, what was associated with the brand, why did the brand matter, what was missing, and what was preventing people from buying it. And it was one of those where people are like, "Oh, I love Duncan Hines, but I don't just want a vanilla or chocolate cake. I want to try funfetti, or I want to do cookies and cream." And so flavor variety quickly became very obvious as the thing that we were not delivering. In terms of pricing, we had kind of, I think, we hadn't separated out cake mix. Interesting in that business is a very competitive product. It's almost like a loss leader for most retailers. And so you have to be competitive on cake mix. But on the other parts of the business, you had more flexibility. So you could be a more decadent brownie that charged a little bit more. So you had to kind of figure out how to manage the portfolio, because it was a very complicated portfolio, but be competitive where you needed to be and then take margin where you could, right? So figuring out the portfolio strategy. And then packaging, we hadn't touched our packaging in a really long time. So it looked dated. It didn't pop out on the shelf. So there were some very basic things that consumer feedback told us we needed to fix. And when we put those pieces together and went to the retailer and said, "Hey, we're going to redo this whole thing." And you're right. I still remember poor lemon frosting did not make it, but most of the other items did.
That's pretty good. Well, and then also when you can go to the retailer and say, look, obviously P&G's got the reputation that helps, right. But if you could say, "Hey, look at this homework we did, and this is why we think this will work."
That's exactly. And we were able to show them. One of the most powerful things I find over and over again is retailers love listening to their shoppers. So we did a great job of putting together a lot of the sound bites from the consumer research we did. So we had a really compelling story to tell when we took it forward. And it's a lot of those same principles I'm using now as we're building, a brand new brand and category.
Okay, great. Well, those are some lessons from the things Karuna made. In just a minute, we're going to look at some lessons from some of the people she made them with, some of that collaboration, some of those stories. But first, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs AI, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. You can build your artificial intelligence strategy with an AI quick win intensive from MECLabs. Learn more at intensives.meclabsai.com. That's intensives.meclabsai.com. I guess to borrow from Duncan Hines, I'll say it's the funfetti of building an AI marketing strategy, the AI Quick Win Intensive. I like that name, funfetti. All right, let's take a look at some of the lessons from the people you collaborated with. You mentioned Chef Eric Ripert, owner at Le Bernardin and the culinary advisor at Nature's Fynd. You mentioned you learned from Chef Eric to set a high bar for quality customer experiences. How did you learn this?
So I don't know if you've ever been to Le Bernardin or, if you go to any 3 Michelin star restaurants, probably true, but especially true with Chef Eric. When I met him, I could just tell he had this, just incredible passion for delivering an impeccable dining experience for every single one of his guests. I mean, it's just the bar is so high and everything is just perfect when you go dine there. But he takes that same approach to the food, and to watch him I was behind the scenes in the kitchen as they're getting ready for service and watching the care, meticulousness with which every dish is prepared. He tastes everything, just the entire process they go through to make sure that every single item that leaves the kitchen is the best it can be. And it meets, and if it's not good, it doesn't go out. There's no discussion, no debate. Make it over again. I mean, if you're watching The Bear, you're probably seeing some of this stuff, right? But it's at such a high level. And I was just so blown away by his passion, not only for incredible food, but just his passion for creating this incredible experience for his customer and his consumer, and his diner. So taking that same principle in terms of, when he became a culinary advisor, just having him really set the high bar, because we knew as we were, building this brand, people hear the story of Nature's Fynd, and it's like, wow, it's found in nature at Yellowstone National Park. It's, it was a part of a research project for NASA. We're now developing these foods made from fungi. But the big question everyone has is, how does it taste, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's the ultimate decider. And I've been in food and beverage a long time. It's always about the taste, right? And so working with someone like him who sets the bar super, super high, and who's, part of our team and is helping us advise and develop the best possible products, to me is the best kind of credentialing we can have for taste. So I think what he helps us do is he reminds me all the time about setting the bar, at the highest level that we can and working to achieve that. And you won't get it every time, but you're always working towards that level so that the consumer, when they taste it, it's like, oh, wow, and this is better for me and it's better for the planet. But you need it because it's delicious, right? Like that's where food has to start.
Well, let's talk about that partnership, Doug. The CPG brand partnering with a chef, a Michelin-starred chef. I don't know him personally, so this is not about him personally, but if you watch TV at all, you get this idea that chefs are not easy to work with. But you also talked about partnerships before, partnering with Whole Foods, partnering with retailers. Yeah. So let me ask you, what lessons have you learned about what works and what doesn't work well in a partnership or a collaboration? For example, I interviewed Tiffin Dano Kwan, the CMO of Amplitude, on How I Made It Marketing. And one of her lessons was become a natural collaborator. And she talked about that collaboration is that key skill for every marketer, and talked about that just internal collaboration between the marketing and the product team to get everything right. But when you talk about these collaborations, I see this all this time. There's that little X everywhere, right? It's Supreme X Louis Vuitton. Now it's Nature's Fynd X Le Bernardin. What does it take from your experience? Like, what works and what doesn't in those type of collabs and partnerships? It seems like very different cultures.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I've been thinking about for a bit, because we just also, did a recent collaboration and partnership with Chef Stephanie Izard from Girl and the Goat. And so it got me thinking about, partnerships in general. And to me, it really comes down to authenticity. I think if we can, approach these partnerships with a spirit of collaboration, as you said, but also be really authentic and transparent about what is it that we want on either side. How do we create a win-win, and be really transparent about, we're very honest when we go into a partnership, like, okay, here are the things we're looking for. And then I try very hard to elicit that same, like, why does Chef Eric want to work with us? And what is he excited about? And if we can find those points of excitement, so I'll give you 2 examples. So one is with Chef Eric. One of the things we actually did, in addition to him being culinary advisors, last year we did a limited time release of a collaboration where he created a salad dressing using our protein. So with a collaboration between Nature's Fynd and Eric Ripert to launch this limited line of amazing, delicious salad dressings. And again, we just sold them online for a short amount of time. They sold out in 6 hours and people were raving about them. But it was a chance to kind of, he wanted to do something really fun and creative. And he just loved the idea of how, our protein can make these sauces that are so hard to make when you're trying to make them vegan. And that kind of, and as we talked more, he got really excited about dressing. So we found a way to find a win-win, something he was excited about, we were excited about, and find those, again, mutual points of interest. With Chef Stephanie Izard, she's a big fan of, she loves doing brunches at her restaurant. And we talked about, like, what if we did one together and you created a menu using our protein? And we just last 2 weekends ago, she hosted a brunch with us at Cabra, her restaurant, and the entire menu was based on Fynd. So everything on there. And she loved it because she's a very creative chef. She likes playing with new ingredients. So we try to find, those things that excite both sides and, like, let's capitalize on the magic. So it always looks a little bit different because it's to that individual and it's authentic. And as a brand, we have many different, pillars we're trying to work towards. And so finding that intersection of what we're excited about and what they love to do, I think it's true for everything. With, even with Whole Foods, they were super excited about the innovation we were bringing forward, and they wanted it to, get out there as quickly as possible. So it was, but bringing them in and saying, hey, as we're working on this pipeline of products, what do you guys think would do really well with because your shopper is our consumer. So how do we find the common interest? And, they love being able to collaborate with us on future products that we may be introducing.
No, and that's a great lesson I love when good marketing lessons are just good life lessons. That's just a good life lesson for what makes a good relationship, right? That's
exactly, I should have said that. And you're right. It's like any other relationship. You just have to take the time to understand the other side. You have to, and you may not agree on everything, but at the same time, if you find those common points of interest, usually there's a spark there that leads to bigger things.
Yeah. And let's talk about, here's another great lesson that this was not a marketing podcast. If this was a parenting podcast or any life podcast, this would fit in just perfectly. You said, always choose to do the harder right thing than the easy wrong thing. And you learned this from Chip Bergh, the former CEO of Levi Strauss. How did you learn this from Chip?
So Chip and I go way back. He actually was my marketing director who promoted me to brand manager. So I worked for Chip for a long time. And he's been since been a mentor, an advisor, a friend, you name it. And it's one of those lessons that never leaves you because he really, really emphasized it both in the way you run a business as well as how you manage your team and your people. And, in both cases and in life, if we add a third, there are times when that, the easy road is not the right one. It's often the harder one that you have to make a decision on. And so whether it's for the business, if you think about just short-term versus long-term, very much he believed in let's make choices that are going to, build this brand for the long term as opposed to doing something that's just going to, pop next quarter sales. And then we're going to be in trouble because we didn't make the right choices. Similarly with people, P&G had this philosophy of up or out when I was there. So either you were, promoted to the next level or you were asked to leave. And those are hard decisions to make, right? When, there's always the temptation to say, well, maybe if I tried something else but sometimes it's like when it's not right, make the call. And my, story that I always share is one of the first people I had to actually let go from the company thanked me, which I was not, I was terrified to have that conversation. And she said, I'd been feeling for a while that this wasn't the right fit for me, but no one was having that honest conversation with me. So thank you for having the honest conversation. Now I can move on and go do the thing. And she's gone on to be extremely successful in a completely different environment. But I think recognizing when something needs to happen and it needs to happen in a timely basis, making that decision, even though it's not easy, works for business, works for parenting, as you said, works for life. But he was the embodiment of he walked the talk, and it was a lesson he kind of reinforced all the time for everyone who worked with him. And not that long ago, I had the amazing opportunity to regroup with him for a session on mentors and mentees coming together after a long time. And I recalled that lesson, and he was amazed. And I said, yeah, but it stuck with me, and it's really helped guide how I manage my teams and my businesses to this day.
Oh, that's great. But let me ask you that. So the natural next question is, okay, well, how do you do that? And let me tell you why I asked that, right? Mm-hmm. Because we live in an age of short-termism. Right. I mean, I know you're not a public company right now, but if you're a public company, you have to show, instant results. You mentioned upper out to Procter & Gamble. That's not necessarily only about sales and profitability, but I'm sure that plays a role. So I just wondered, do you have any specific examples of okay, here's how we did the right thing for the customer, even if it was wrong for the business in the short term? I'll give you just one quick example from some stuff we've done. We've done some research into we call customer first marketing, and we did a nationally representative survey of 2,400 people. 1,200 we said, talk about a company, tell us about a company that you're satisfied with. And the other 1,200 we said, tell us about a company you're unsatisfied with. And then we asked a series of questions. And some of the key differentiators that came up between the satisfied and unsatisfied were not just the things you would think, like they had a good experience. Of course, you're more likely to be satisfied. But the satisfied customers were more likely to feel like that company is acting in my best interest versus the unsatisfied customers who would feel like that company and its marketing is not in my best interest. That all sounds good in theory, but again, it comes down to probably being in a meeting room or boardroom or making a decision where you have to take a hit in the short term, even though you're going to have to report to the street in about a month about this quarter's results, or whatever it may be, whoever you have to report to. So I don't know if you have any specific examples or advice there around, okay, I love this idea in theory. When it comes to just the heat of being in the trenches and having to show instant results, how do we do the right thing for the customer in the short term, in the short and the long term?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, one of the examples I talked about earlier kind of fits in this, but I can expound on it a little bit more with Whole Foods. As I mentioned, when they wanted us to go national, yes, that would have been the easy, wrong thing to do, right? Because it would have, it's like, great, we're now national. But the price we would have had to pay when we couldn't deliver orders, when we didn't, fulfill, when our supply chain was under extreme constraint, and then ultimately disappointing their shopper, to me that's not a price I thought was the right thing to do. So fighting for that, I think is one example. It's like, if you know in your heart that this is not going to ultimately result in where you want to go, it's important to make that decision. Similarly, as we were getting ready to launch, it's kind of a funny story. So everyone in the category, when we were getting ready to launch, everybody was working on a burger, right? Impossible had launched a burger. Beyond Meat had launched a burger. And, our team was also looking at the burger because that was the thing. And when I came in, I said, do we really want to do that? Because it's like going up against Coke and Pepsi. We have no money, and we're going to be trying to, shout into the same, vast beyond without any dollars. So let's kind of think about a different strategy. So we decided to pivot and look at breakfast instead. And that presented an interesting opportunity. So we thought, okay, well, we can do a great pork sausage that tastes just like a pork sausage, but obviously vegan and, much healthier. And then we had a yogurt. We had actually, that was on 60 Minutes that we were, thinking we would launch. So we said we want to do meat and dairy because that distinguishes us. Well, as we got ready to do the launch, we realized that the yogurt was not to the standard we wanted. There was more work that needed to be, as we were getting closer to launch time, we had to say, okay, maybe that's not we decided instead of launching it, not having it be the absolute best it could be, it was better to take the time to make it right. And then we launched that a little bit later than we'd originally planned, but we had a cream cheese product that was ready to go. So we did that. So again, you can do the short-term thing because you check the box, but then it comes back to haunt you if it doesn't go right. So it's constantly weighing that, and we're doing that all the time, even with our limited capacity, because we have to actually grow our protein. We have to be really careful because there's a lot of pressure. I mean, yes, you're right, we're not public, but at the same time, there's still a lot of pressure to how many doors are you in? How many doors can you get into? And I keep saying, let's just figure out the doors in, and let's make sure we can deliver those consistently. So we've really constrained, expansion until our capacity and has been ready to go. Because, I know living with the results of a bad launch, it's really, it's painful. You don't want to go there. You want to build that reputation with the retailer and want them to trust you. And in the end, I think retailers were very appreciative of us being honest and saying, hey, we're not ready for you. We'll come back as soon as we've got the capacity. We're excited you're interested, but now would not be the right time. So we're kind of really managing our growth to make sure that we don't overextend ourselves and stretch ourselves so thin that we can't support the growth that we want to have. So that's probably a good, that's a discussion we have all the time. But you're right, it's not easy because there's always pressure to say, go, make it happen. And you're trying to do that. But at the same time, you want to make sure you don't do things that are going to ultimately damage the brand and the business.
History is littered with brands that have grown too fast and killed what was a good product. Exactly. I won't mention the name, but there is a diner that's based in our hometown here. It was an amazing diner. And of course, they franchised it, grew too quickly. And it's like, what is it now? Like you had something special. It's hard to grow slow. That's
another lesson I would say I've learned from Eric Repair. They have one Le Bernardin.
Yeah.
And he's been very careful about just focusing intently on delivering. It's an experience like no other, but there's not 50 of them. And I think there's something to be said for that, right? If you can figure out how to do it in a way that just delivers an outstanding experience, like let's master that first before we try to do too many of them.
Right. And make sure we know, if we're going to scale up, make sure we know how to scale up because.
Right. And scaling is not for everyone or everything. I mean, in that industry, it's obviously, being that unique, one of a kind has a tremendous value.
Yeah. It is hard to do one thing well, let alone 50 things. One lesson here, you said align strategy with creativity. You learned this from Judy John, Global Chief Creative Officer at Edelman. And this industry, it's such a fun industry to work in for creative people. But if you don't have the strategy behind the creative, what are you doing at the end of the day? So how did you learn this lesson from Judy, align strategy with creativity?
Yeah. So, I spent the first half of my career as a brand manager. So as a client, on the receiving end of creative ideas and campaigns. And, as anybody who sat on that side of this, there are a bunch of times where you scratch your head and you go, okay, great, creative, fun, but has nothing to do with my brand or the strategy, right? So when I kind of went to the other side, to the agency side, and got to actually sit in the role of a strategist, it was fascinating to see, like when you had, when you brought like strategic underpinning to a creative, a great creative, they ate it up. That's what they used as the foundation to go create. And when those things kind of come together, they really have a tremendous impact because the consumer identifies can relate to the insight right away, and then it's paid off beautifully in a creative way that a strategist alone can't do. And so while I appreciated that, it wasn't until and Judy was the one I worked with on the Always campaign, and we'd never worked together before. And I still remember, the first meeting we were going to have with the client, she said, this one's all yours. You're the strategist. You got to set the table. I'm not serving dinner until you set the table. And I thought that was a really great way to put it, right? So my job was to go in and make it almost like so easy to say yes to the creative because we'd laid the foundation. We had explained, what we were trying to do, who the consumer was, what the insight was, why that meshed with the brand. So it was almost like, you're ready for when the creative gets delivered because it just makes sense. When you don't have that upfront strategy, especially for a client, like P&G, who are very much looking for that. But it's important in any business. I mean, every piece of creative I look at, I try to understand, okay, what was the insight? What was the strategy? What were they trying to do? And how well does the creative pay that off? But that's a really important lesson. And I feel like I've been fortunate enough to sit on both sides of the table on that one. To understand what is the client looking for. And then as a strategist to be able to say, okay, how do I connect the dots from what the client's looking for to what the creative's doing? And that strategy is that bridge between the two. It's understanding the business problem, but then translating it into something inspirational for a creative to go ideate from.
So now when you're hiring, I mean, you're growing a brand, you're growing a team, you're growing a company. When you're hiring, whether that's vendors or individuals on your team, are you looking for people who have that combination, or are you looking for, I'm building a team around this? Because for me personally, I started my career as a copywriter. I always looked at it as I needed to be creative, but I needed the strategy behind it because it's a commercial art. And without it, you're just creative. We'll write a book or something, right? But at the flip side, you gave a great example there with Judy about how you teamed up to work on the strategy and the creative. So kind of take us into what is your hiring strategy, whether it's for individuals on your team or your vendors, or is that like something they have to have strategy and creativity? Or I'm going to build this team of many talents and let's kind of pull them together with the right processes and we'll all make it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ideally, yes, I'd like to find those individuals who have, who've got a kind of a blend of both. I will tell you, it's not easy to find.
Exactly.
I've learned that there aren't many people like me who've done kind of both sides of it. So what I've tried to do is build a team that collectively. So I do have I have an in-house creative team that obviously very much agency creative background. And then I have, the sort of the category management side, which is much more folks who've come from, the Pepsis and the Frito-Lays and the P&Gs and General Mills, and like they have the strong business general management, what I call the left side of the brain of marketing, and then you need the right side of the brain, and then you kind of put those together. And I think because I have the unique perspective of having done both, I'm able to bring those people together. And the best ideas happen when they come together, when they can each, benefit. And so I've seen a lot of that synergy happening on my team because these folks are very, working in very close quarters together, and you can take the same problem, they'll approach it in very different ways, but the magic happens when you can kind of bring those together.
Well, thanks for walking us through your career. This just brings me to my final question. We talk about strategy, creativity. What are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
For me, number one is curiosity. So it goes back to the question you asked me at the very beginning. I feel like if you are going to be a great marketer, you have to have an innate curiosity about what makes people tick and what makes them behave the way that they do. If you're not interested or excited in that, it's really hard to be a good marketer. So I think that's really number one for me. I think, a level of, interest and passion for creativity, I think is, it doesn't have to be creativity in a defined traditional sense, but I think interesting ways to look at how can creative solutions transform a challenge or change behavior, like being interested in that. I think having a passion for people and helping people and, helping people live better lives. And that's kind of the marketing world I grew up in. So I look for that. I look for people who are, very action oriented. I think, a lot of philosophical marketing is great, but people who are interested in getting in the game and excited about winning and excited about, putting work out there that makes a difference. So people who want to make a difference in the world. I mean, a lot of it is around, our company's values. They want to leave the world better than they found it. They have the ability to find a way to get things done. They're super curious. And, there is a love of marketing. I mean, I've loved the art and science of marketing because it's both. It's art and science. But I think if you don't have some of the innate qualities of being interested in people, being interested in brands, being interested in creativity, it's hard to teach those things. A lot of the other stuff, you can teach, but I look for people who have that sense of wanting to make a difference because I think marketing does make a very positive difference in people's lives if it's done the right way.
Absolutely. For the love of marketing. I wish I called the podcast that. That would be a good one. Well, thank you so much for all your time today, Karun. I learned a lot. I appreciate you sharing so much from your career with us.
Thank you. This was a really fun conversation, and I appreciate it.
Thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketing, SHERPA.com.